70-year-old black man falsely accused at mall. When teenagers confess the truth, the entire town's reaction will shock you. The fluorescent lights of Mayfield Mall buzzed overhead as Marcus Johnson made his way through the busy shopping center. At 62 years old, the retired high school teacher moved with a slight limp, a remnant of his college football days, but he held his head high, greeting familiar faces with a warm smile. Marcus had lived in the small town of Millbrook his entire life, and a trip to the mall on a Saturday afternoon was as much a social outing as it was an errand run. He paused at the directory, squinting at the small text. His bifocals were acting up again, and he made a mental note to schedule an appointment with Dr. Patel. After a moment, he located what he was looking for: Treasured Memories, a new gift shop on the second floor. His granddaughter's 5th birthday was coming up, and he wanted to find something special for little Zoe. As Marcus rode the escalator up, his mind drifted to happier time. It had been nearly 2 years since Evelyn, his wife of 4 decades, passed away. The hole in his heart was still raw, but moments like this, picking out a gift for Zoe, helped ease the pain. Evelyn had always been the gift giver in the family, with an uncanny knack for finding the perfect present. Marcus hoped some of that talent had rubbed off on him over the years. The second floor was noticeably quieter than the bustling food court below. Marcus's footsteps echoed on the polished tile as he made his way towards Treasured Memories. The shop's window display caught his eye: an array of delicate music boxes, hand-painted ceramics, and whimsical stuffed animals. Perfect for a little girl with a big imagination. As Marcus reached for the door handle, a commotion from the other end of the corridor made him pause. Raised voices carried through the air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Frowning, Marcus turned to see what was happening. A group of teenagers had gathered outside the electronics store, their excited chatter punctuated by bursts of laughter. At the center of the group, 2 young men were squaring off, their body language tense and aggressive. Before Marcus could process what was happening, one of the teens shoved the other hard, sending him stumbling backwards into a potted plant. "Hey now," Marcus called out, his teacher's instincts kicking in. "Let's calm down, fellas. No need for." His words were cut short as the shoved teen regained his balance and lunged at his attacker. In a flurry of flailing limbs, both young men tumbled to the ground. The surrounding crowd erupted in a cacophony of shouts and jeers. Marcus quickened his pace, hoping to defuse the situation before it escalated further. As he drew closer, he could see that one of the young men, a lanky kid with close-cropped hair, had gained the upper hand. He straddled his opponent, raining down wild punches. "That's enough," Marcus shouted, his deep voice carrying over the din. "Break it up right now." Crowd parted as Marcus approached, few onlookers muttering nervously. Combatants, however, seemed oblivious to his presence. The young man on top continued his assault, face contorted with rage. Without hesitation, Marcus reached down and grabbed the teen by the shoulders, attempting to pull him off. "I said that's enough, son. It's over." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The young man, startled by Marcus's intervention, swung his arm back wildly. His elbow connected solidly with Marcus's nose, sending a shock of pain through the older man's face. Marcus stumbled backward, his vision blurring as his eyes watered. "What the hell, old man?" Ian snarled, scrambling to his feet. "Mind your own damn business." Marcus blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision. He could feel warm blood trickling from his nose, staining the front of his polo shirt. The corridor had fallen eerily silent, earlier excitement replaced by a palpable tension. "I'm just trying to help," Marcus said, his voice thick. Fumbled in his pocket for a handkerchief, pressing it gingerly to his nose. Someone could get seriously hurt if... The teen cut him off with a harsh laugh. "Looks like someone already did. Should have stayed out of it, Pops." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus became acutely aware of the many eyes fixed upon him. Some concerned, others merely curious. Felt a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. This wasn't how he had envisioned his afternoon unfolding. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice rang out. Marcus turned to see a heavy-set man in a navy blue uniform approaching. A security guard's hand rested casually on his belt near his walkie-talkie. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in Marcus's bloodied face and the agitated group of teenagers. "No problem, officer," the instigator of the fight said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding. We were about to leave." The security guard's eyes narrowed. "Is that right?" He looked at Marcus. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Marcus lowered the handkerchief, wincing at the throb of pain. "I'll be fine," he said. "But these young men were fighting. I tried to break it up and, well," he gestured vaguely at his face. The guard's expression hardened. "Fighting in the mall is strictly prohibited. I'm going to need all of you to come with me to the security office. We'll sort this out there." A chorus of protests erupted from the teenagers. The guard held up a hand, silencing them. "This isn't up for debate. Let's go now." As the group began to move towards the escalators, Marcus felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see an elderly woman with kind eyes looking up at him. "Are you sure you're all right, dear?" she asked. "That looks quite painful. Perhaps you should see a doctor." Marcus managed a small smile. "Thank you for your concern, ma'am. I'll be fine, truly. Just a bit of excitement I wasn't expecting today." The woman patted his arm. "Well, I think it was very brave of you to step in like that. Not many would have done the same." Her words warmed Marcus's heart, providing a small comfort amidst the chaos of the afternoon. As he followed the security guard and the group of teenagers towards the mall's administrative offices, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was far from over. Little did he know just how right he would prove to be. The security office was a cramped, windowless room tucked away in a forgotten corner of the mall. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare over the group as they filed in, air thick with tension. Marcus eased himself into a plastic chair, his nose still throbbing. The teenagers huddled together on a worn couch, shooting furtive glances at the security guard who loomed over them. "All right," the guard said, his voice gruff. "I'm Officer Dawson. Let's start from the beginning. Who wants to tell me what happened?" A moment of silence passed before the lanky teen who had struck Marcus spoke up. "It was just a misunderstanding, sir. Things got a little heated, but we were handling it." Dawson's eyebrows shot up. "Handling it? Is that what you call assaulting an elderly man?" Teen's face flushed. "I didn't mean to hit him. He grabbed me from behind. I just reacted." "That true?" Dawson asked, turning to Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly. "I was trying to break up the fight. I suppose I startled him, but it was an accident." Dawson's eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus. "And how exactly did you get involved in this, Mr. Johnson?" "Marcus Johnson," he replied. "I was just passing by when I saw the altercation. I thought I could help defuse the situation." A snort of derision came from one of the other teens. "Yeah, real helpful, old man. Should have minded your own business." "That's enough," Dawson snapped. Turned back to Marcus, his expression softening slightly. "Mr. Johnson, I appreciate your intention to help, but in the future, please leave these matters to trained security personnel." "Now, do you want to press charges for the assault?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "Charges? No. As I said, it was an accident. I'm sure these young men have learned their lesson." A ripple of relief passed through the teenagers, but Dawson didn't look convinced. "Be that as it may, we have a zero-tolerance policy for violence in this mall. I'm going to have to ban all of you from the premises for the next 30 days. Protests erupted from the group, but Dawson silenced them with a raised hand. "Consider yourselves lucky. Could be much worse." He began taking down their information, issuing trespass warnings with practiced efficiency. As the process dragged on, Marcus found his mind wandering. The adrenaline from earlier was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained and slightly ridiculous. What had he been thinking? Trying to play the hero at his age? Evelyn would have given him an earful for being so reckless. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A young woman in a crisp blazer poked her head in, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Officer Dawson, there's a situation at the food court that requires your attention." Dawson sighed heavily. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something here." Woman shook her head. "I'm afraid not, sir. It's escalating quickly." With a frustrated growl, Dawson turned to the group. "None of you move. I'll be back to finish this paperwork." He strode out of the office, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. After a moment, one of the teenagers, a stocky boy with a mop of curly hair, spoke up. "Look, mister, we're really sorry about what happened. We didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. Marcus offered a tired smile. I know, son. These things happen. But you boys need to understand that violence is never the answer. Whatever disagreement you had, there are better ways to resolve it. The lanky teen who had struck Marcus shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't even a real fight. We were just messing around, trying to make a video for social media. Things got out of hand. Marcus felt a surge of disbelief. A video? You mean this whole thing was staged? The teens exchanged guilty looks. Not exactly staged, one of them muttered. We were trying to get reactions from people. You know, for likes and followers. A heavy silence fell over the room as Marcus processed this information. He thought of his own grandchildren, of the pressures they faced in this digital age. It was a world so far removed from his own youth, yet the fundamental desire for attention and validation remained unchanged. I see, Marcus said finally. Well, I suppose we've all learned something today, haven't we? About the consequences of our actions, whether they're meant for an audience or not. The door burst open, startling everyone. Officer Dawson stormed in, his face flushed with anger. All right, change of plans. You're all free to go, except you. He pointed at Marcus, who blinked in confusion. I'm sorry? Marcus said, bewildered. I don't understand. Dawson's eyes were cold. Mr. Johnson, you're going to have to come with me. We've received some concerning information about your involvement in today's events. Teenagers exchanged panicked looks. Wait, the lanky one said. This is all a misunderstanding. Mr. Johnson didn't do anything wrong. But Dawson wasn't listening. He grabbed Marcus by the arm, hauling him to his feet with unnecessary force. Let's go. We can discuss this further in private. As Dawson led him out of the office, Marcus's mind reeled. What could possibly have happened in the span of a few minutes to turn him from victim to suspect? The confused and frightened faces of the teenagers were the last thing he saw before the door slammed shut behind him. In the corridor, Marcus found himself surrounded by a small crowd of onlookers. Phones were out, recording the scene. He could hear snippets of conversation, words like assault and elderly man, being thrown around. But something was off. The story being passed around bore little resemblance to what had actually transpired. Officer Dawson, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady, I think there's been a terrible mistake. If we could just talk about this. Save it, Dawson growled. We've got witnesses saying you started the whole thing. Trying to rob those kids, were you? Thought you'd take advantage of the chaos? Marcus felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Rob them? That's absurd. I was trying to help. But his protests fell on deaf ears. As Dawson marched him through the mall, Marcus could feel the weight of judging eyes upon him. How had things gone so terribly wrong? As they approached the mall's main entrance, Marcus saw a news van pulling into the parking lot. His heart sank. Whatever was happening, it was clear that his quiet Saturday afternoon had spiraled into something far beyond his control. Little did Marcus know, the events unfolding around him were about to expose deep-seated tensions within the community, challenge long-held beliefs, and force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, perception, and the power of misinformation in the digital age. The evening news led with a sensationalized headline, Elderly Man Accused in Mall Altercation. Grainy cell phone footage showed Marcus being escorted out of the mall, his face a mask of confusion and distress. The story spread like wildfire through social media, each share and retweet further distorting the truth. In the Millbrook police station, Marcus sat in a stark interrogation room, his hands clasped tightly on the table before him. The events of the past few hours felt like a surreal nightmare. He had been fingerprinted, photographed, and questioned repeatedly. Now, he waited anxiously for his son Michael to arrive with a lawyer. The door opened, and a tall, severe-looking woman entered. Mr. Johnson, I'm Detective Sarah Reeves. I'll be handling your case. Marcus straightened in his chair. Detective, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If I could just explain. Reeves held up a hand, silencing him. Mr. Johnson, I advise you to wait for your lawyer before making any statements. The charges against you are serious. Charges? Marcus echoed, his voice hollow. What exactly am I being charged with? The detective's eyes were cold as she read from a file. Assault, attempted robbery, and inciting a riot. Multiple witnesses claim you instigated the incident at the mall, attempting to take advantage of the chaos to rob several minors. Marcus felt the room spin. That's completely false. I was trying to break up a fight. I'm the one who was assaulted. A knock at the door interrupted them. Michael burst in, followed by a sharp-dressed woman who Marcus assumed was the lawyer. His son's face was a mixture of worry and barely contained anger. "Dad, are you okay?" Michael rushed to Marcus's side, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. The lawyer stepped forward. "I'm Andrea Simmons, Mr. Johnson's attorney. Detective Reeves, I'd like a moment alone with my client." Reeves nodded curtly and left the room. As soon as the door closed, Michael turned to his father. "Dad, what the hell is going on? I saw the news. They're saying you tried to rob some kids." Marcus shook his head, his voice trembling slightly as he recounted the events at the mall. As he spoke, Andrea listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When he finished, the lawyer leaned forward. "Mr. Johnson, I want you to know that I believe you. But we're facing an uphill battle here. The narrative has already taken hold in the media, and eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable." Michael paced the small room, agitation clear in every movement. "This is insane. Dad's lived in this town his entire life. He was a teacher, for crying out loud. How could anyone believe he'd do something like this?" Andrea's expression was grim. "Unfortunately, that's not how the court of public opinion works. We need to get ahead of this story, fast." As they discussed strategy, Marcus's mind drifted to the teenagers from the mall. Surely they would come forward and tell the truth, but a nagging doubt crept in. Would they risk admitting their own role in the incident? Across town, in a modest suburban home, one of those very teenagers, the lanky boy who had accidentally struck Marcus, sat hunched over his phone. His name was Tyler, and he was watching the view count climb on the video he had posted earlier that day. The footage showed the aftermath of the incident. Marcus being led away by security, with panicked voices in the background spreading misinformation. Tyler had added a sensational caption, "Old man goes crazy at the mall. #Mall Cop Fight Club." As the likes and comments poured in, Tyler felt a mixture of excitement and guilt churning in his stomach. He hadn't meant for things to go this far. It was supposed to be a harmless prank, a way to get some attention online. Now, an innocent man's life was being turned upside down. Tyler's video was adding fuel to the fire. His phone buzzed with a text from one of his friends. "Dude, we're going viral. This is insane." Tyler stared at the message, his finger hovering over the reply button. He thought of Mr. Johnson's kind eyes, the way he had tried to diffuse the situation without judgment. With a deep breath, Tyler made a decision. He began to type, "Guys, we need to talk. We have to make this right." Meanwhile, at the Millbrook Gazette, veteran reporter Elaine Chen was burning the midnight oil. Something about the mall story didn't add up, and she was determined to uncover the truth. She had known Marcus Johnson for years. He had been her daughter's favorite teacher, and the accusations against him seemed completely out of character. Elaine pored over witness statements, security footage, and social media posts. As she pieced together the timeline of events, inconsistencies began to emerge. Why had the story changed so dramatically between the initial reports and later accounts? And why were some key witnesses, including the teenagers involved in the original altercation, nowhere to be found? As dawn broke over Millbrook, the small town found itself thrust into the national spotlight. News vans lined the streets, and reporters clamored for statements from local officials. The incident had touched a nerve, tapping into broader debates about age discrimination, the reliability of eyewitness testimony, and the dangers of rush to judgment in the age of viral videos. At the Johnson household, Marcus's wife, Linda, fielded a constant barrage of phone calls. Old friends, former students, and concerned neighbors all reached out, offering support and expressing disbelief at the accusations. But there were also angry voices, people who had already made up their minds based on the sensationalized news report. Linda sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cold cup of coffee, when the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find a young man shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Tyler. I need to tell you something about what happened at the mall." As Tyler began to speak, First rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon. In that moment, a small spark of hope flickered to life. The path to clearing Marcus's name would be long and difficult. But the truth had a way of coming to light, even in the darkest of time. Across town, in the harsh fluorescent glare of the police station, Marcus Johnson closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought of his family, his students, the community he had served for decades. He thought of the principles he had always tried to uphold: honesty, integrity, and the belief in justice. Opening his eyes, Marcus turned to his lawyer with renewed determination. "Miss Simmons," he said, his voice steady, "I'm ready to fight this. Not just for myself, but for the truth. Whatever it takes." Andrea nodded, glimmer of admiration in her eyes. "Then let's get to work, Mr. Johnson. Your story deserves to be heard." As they began to strategize their next moves, neither of them could have predicted the series of events that were about to unfold. Events that would not only challenge the fabric of their small town, but also spark a national conversation about prejudice, media responsibility, and the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Following days in Millbrook unfolded like scenes from a surreal drama. Marcus Johnson's case had become a lightning rod for controversy, sparking heated debates on street corners, in coffee shops, and across social media platforms. The center of the storm, Elaine Chen of the Millbrook Gazette worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Her latest article, titled "Rush Judgment: The Marcus Johnson Story," had sent shockwaves through the community. In it, she meticulously laid out the timeline of events, highlighting the discrepancies in witness accounts and questioning the hasty conclusions drawn by both law enforcement and the media. The morning after the article's publication, Elaine found herself face-to-face with Officer Dawson in the police station's lobby. The security guard's face was flushed with anger as he jabbed a finger at the newspaper in his hand. "You've got some nerve, Chen," he growled, questioning my judgment, implying I didn't do my job properly. Elaine met his gaze steadily. "I'm just reporting the facts, Officer Dawson. If those facts cast doubt on your actions, perhaps that's something you should reflect on." As Dawson sputtered a reply, Detective Reeves emerged from a nearby office. "That's enough," she said sharply. "Dawson, my office, now." He turned to Elaine with a measured look. "Miss Chen, I think it's time we had a conversation." Meanwhile, across town, Tyler and his friends huddled in the basement of his home. The atmosphere was tense, filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Can't believe you went to Johnson's wife," hissed Jake, the stocky teen with curly hair. "Do you realize how much trouble we could be in?" Tyler ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "What was I supposed to do? Let an innocent man take the fall for our stupid prank?" "It wasn't just a prank anymore when you posted that video," retorted Zoe, her eyes flashing. "You made it look way worse than it was." The room fell silent as the weight of their actions settled over them. Finally, Maria, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Guys, we have to make this right. We need to go to the police and tell them everything." The suggestion was met with a chorus of protests, but Maria held firm. "Think about it. If we come forward now, voluntarily, it'll look a lot better than if they figure it out on their own. And they will figure it out. You saw that reporter's article." As the teens debated their next move, Linda Johnson sat in her living room, surrounded by a small group of supporters. Former students, colleagues, and neighbors had rallied around the family, offering everything from legal advice to casseroles. "I just can't believe how quickly people turned on Marcus," said Tom Baker, a fellow retired teacher. 30 years of service to this community, and it means nothing the moment some viral video paints him as a villain. Linda nodded warily. "It's been eye-opening, to say the least. But for every person who's been quick to judge, there's been someone standing up for the truth. Gives me hope." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Linda opened it to find Andrea Simmons, Marcus's lawyer, standing on the porch with a cautiously optimistic expression. "Mrs. Johnson," Andrea said, "I think we've had a breakthrough. May I come in?" Back at the police station, Detective Reeves sat across from Elaine Chen, grudging respect in her eyes. "Off the record," she began, "I have to admit your article raised some valid points. We may have been too quick to accept the initial narrative." Elaine leaned forward, her reporter's instincts on high alert. "Does this mean you're reopening the investigation?" Reeves chose her words carefully. Let's just say we're taking a closer look at all the evidence, including some new testimonies that have recently come to light. As if on cue, the door burst open and a flustered officer rushed in. Detective, you're going to want to see this. A group of teenagers just walked in, saying they have information about the Johnson case. Across town, in the sterile confines of the county jail, Marcus sat on the edge of his bunk, trying to maintain hope. The past few days had been a blur of legal consultations, brief family visits, and long hours of solitary reflection. Guard appeared at his cell door. Johnson, you've got a visitor. Marcus looked up in surprise. It wasn't a scheduled visitation day. He followed the guard to the visitor's area, his heart quickening as he wondered who it could be. As he entered the room, he stopped short. Sitting behind the glass partition was Tyler, the teen from the mall. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, his posture slumped with the weight of guilt. Mr. Johnson, Tyler began, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. We're going to make this right, I promise. As Tyler began to explain, Marcus felt a surge of emotions. Relief, anger, compassion, and a glimmer of hope. Truth was finally coming to light, but he knew the road ahead would not be easy. Meanwhile, in the offices of WMBK, the local news station, producer Sarah Walters was facing a crisis of conscience. She had been responsible for running with the initial sensationalized story about Marcus, prioritizing ratings over fact-checking. Now, as new information emerged, she grappled with the station's responsibility in perpetuating a false narrative. We need to issue a retraction, she argued to the station manager, a full apology and a commitment to more rigorous reporting standards going forward. The manager scoffed, and tank our credibility? No way. We reported what we knew at the time. Sarah stood her ground. Our credibility is already shot if we don't acknowledge our mistakes. This is bigger than ratings. It's about journalistic integrity and a man's life. As debates raged and new evidence came to light, the town of Millbrook found itself at a crossroads. The Marcus Johnson case had exposed deep-seated issues of prejudice, media responsibility, and the dangerous speed at which misinformation could spread in the digital age. In homes, offices, and public spaces across Millbrook, people were being forced to confront their own biases and the ease with which they had accepted false narrative. Conversations about race, age discrimination, and the flaws in the justice system bubbled to the surface, sometimes uncomfortable but always necessary. As the sun set on another tumultuous day, Marcus Johnson lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Despite the hardships he had faced, a small smile played on his lips. The truth was emerging, bit by bit, and with it came the hope for justice and redemption. Little did he know that the coming days would bring even more startling revelations, testing the bonds of friendship, the limits of forgiveness, and the very fabric of the community he had served for so long. The story of Marcus Johnson was far from over, and its resolution would leave an indelible mark on Millbrook and beyond. The Millbrook Community Center buzzed with tension as residents filed in for an emergency town hall meeting. Past week had been a whirlwind of revelations, each new piece of information sending ripples through the tight-knit community. Now, as the truth about Marcus Johnson's case came to light, the town gathered to confront its collective mistakes and chart a path forward. Mayor Evelyn Hawkins stood at the podium, her usual confidence tempered by the gravity of the situation. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "We're here tonight to address the events surrounding Marcus Johnson and the incident at Mayfield Mall. But more than that, we're here to have an honest conversation about who we are as a community and who we want to be." In the front row, Marcus sat with his family, his face a mixture of weariness and resolve. The past few days had been a blur. His release from jail, tearful reunions, and a barrage of apologies from those who had been quick to judge. Now, as he faced his neighbors, he felt the weight of their expectations. Mayor Hawkins continued, "Before we open the floor for discussion, I'd like to invite Marcus Johnson to say a few words." A hush fell over the room as Marcus made his way to the podium. He cleared his throat, looking out over the sea of familiar faces. "Thank you, Mayor Hawkins," he began, his voice steady. "I've lived in Millbrook my entire life. I've taught many of your children, celebrated your joys, and mourned your losses. What happened to me could have happened to any one of you. Paused, letting his words sink in. It's easy to point fingers, to lay blame on the police, the media, or the young people involved. But the truth is, we all played a part in this. We let fear and prejudice cloud our judgment. We accepted a false narrative because it was easier than questioning our own biases. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus pressed on. But I'm not here to condemn. I'm here to ask that we use this experience as a catalyst for change. Let's commit to being a community that seeks truth, that values justice, and that stands up for one another, regardless of age, race, or circumstance. As Marcus stepped back from the podium, the room erupted in applause. Tears were visible on many faces, collective catharsis of guilt and hope. The meeting continued late into the night. Community members took turns sharing their thoughts, grappling with difficult questions about prejudice, media literacy, and the responsibility of citizenship in the digital age. Tyler and his friends, who had come forward with the truth, faced the community's judgment with a mixture of fear and resolve. We made a terrible mistake, Tyler said, his voice shaking, but we're committed to making amends. We want to start a program in local schools about the dangers of online misinformation and the importance of critical thinking. Their initiative was met with cautious approval, a small step towards redemption. Sarah Walters, the news producer, announced WMBK's commitment to more rigorous fact-checking and a new segment dedicated to debunking viral misinformation. We failed our community, she admitted. We're determined to regain your trust and set a new standard for local journalism. As the meeting wound down, Detective Reeves took the podium. In light of the new evidence, all charges against Marcus Johnson have been dropped. Furthermore, we're implementing new training programs for our officers to address issues of bias and hasty judgment. The announcement was met with a standing ovation. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders, even as he recognized that the road to healing, for himself and the community, would be long. In the weeks that followed, Millbrook became a case study in community reconciliation. The story caught national attention, with journalists and sociologists descending on the small town to document its journey. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, reluctantly embracing his role as a catalyst for change. He worked with local schools to develop curriculum about media literacy and civic responsibility. He also became an advocate for criminal justice reform, using his experience to highlight the flaws in the system. The teenagers involved in the initial incident, guided by their newfound sense of responsibility, grew themselves into community service. They worked tirelessly on their anti-misinformation program, speaking at schools across the county. Officer Dawson, after much soul-searching, issued a public apology and requested a transfer to community outreach. His journey from antagonist to ally became a powerful symbol of the possibility of change. Elaine Chen's dogged pursuit of the truth earned her a Pulitzer nomination. Her series of articles on the case sparked a national conversation about the intersection of social media, journalism, and justice. As summer turned to fall, Millbrook hosted a community celebration in the park. It was a day of reflection and renewal, a chance to acknowledge how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Under the shade of an old oak tree, Marcus found a quiet moment amidst the festivities. He thought about the roller coaster of the past months, fear, the anger, the despair, ultimately, the hope. He thought about the resilience of truth and the power of community. A hand on his shoulder startled him from his reverie. He looked up to see Tyler, a tentative smile on the young man's face. "Mr. Johnson," Tyler said, "I just wanted to thank you again for your forgiveness, for your guidance. You've taught us all so much." Marcus stood, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "We've all learned important lessons, Tyler. The true test will be how we apply them going forward." As they walked back towards the celebration, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. The ordeal had been painful, but from that pain had come growth, understanding, and a renewed sense of community. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over Millbrook. As laughter and music filled the air, Marcus Johnson smiled. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real life rarely offered those, but it was a new beginning, and sometimes that was even better.